What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless engineer, and typically I'm analyzing apologists' claim to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. But today we are talking with Nick Fish. Nick is the president of American Atheists, and we are going to be talking about Christian nationalism today. And so, Nick, do you want to start us off by just telling us a little bit about, who you are and everything like that?
Yeah, it's funny you talk about, rebutting apologists and rebutting apologetics. Boy, if you want to see the best of the best, and by which I mean the worst of the worst, check out what's going on in state legislatures with Christian nationalism. You will find absolutely the worst things you can possibly imagine, the worst arguments for injecting religion into politics, into our nation's public policy it's possibly imaginable. So plenty of material for you there for the next, 100 years of shows. So yes. So yeah, a little bit about me. I've been the president of American Atheists now for 4 years. I've been working with the organization for about 10. I'm originally from Michigan, born and raised, went to school there. But I've been working in the secular community for about 12 years now in total, and I've been working in politics since college. Got my start working on the 2008 presidential election down in North Carolina, registering about 5,000 voters, knocking on like 35,000 doors in a month. With a team, obviously not myself, that would be a little much. But politics has always been something that's really interesting to me, and not just like politics as blood sport, like too many of us or too many people sort of view it as, but more like policy. Where does the rubber meet the road? How do we make the world a better place? And, I got done with the election. I was working for political parties, and, I was a little bit disillusioned on some key issues that were really important to me with the Obama administration, where I had disagreed very strongly with the way the Bush administration was doing things. And that's why I got involved in policy. And then President Obama, while, don't get me wrong, vastly improved on a number of issues, continued doing things that I was really concerned about. Warrantless wiretapping, drone strikes, a lot of things that were expanding executive power that were part of the reason that I got involved in politics in the first place. And I couldn't really square that, continuing to advocate for the party and for his policies while he was doing things I disagreed with. So I wanted to get involved in stuff that made a difference, the issues that I cared about, and really focus in on what I felt at the time and still feel is a through line, a thread that ties so much bad policy in America all together, and that's the influence of religion in politics. So if you're somebody who cares about access to reproductive choice, if you care about the LGBT community, if you care about the environment, if you care about democracy, you have to be willing to look at the root of many of those problems. And unfortunately, in the United States, the root of so many of those problems are the influence of a certain type of religion, mainly white Christian nationalism. And we've been talking about this issue now for years, for the better part of the time I've been working for American Atheists. And now, finally, after all this time, the media, other groups are finally starting to wake up, see the issue, and help us confront it, which is both good because it's helping us get a lot of work done, but also really terrifying because they're now seeing just how strong of a problem this is. And the fact is that these groups, even though they're part of a shrinking minority of Americans, a minority of even religious people, a minority of Christians, they still can hold just immense power within our politics. And people are seeing that. And that's really scary because those folks see their power slipping away and are now willing to go really far to really, really extreme places to get what they want. And we're really seeing that in the Supreme Court. We're seeing that in state legislatures. We're seeing that in all the areas where we work. And so it's never been a more important issue than it is right now. And so it's really what motivates me. It's what drives me to do this work.
Awesome. And yeah, I'm very much driven to help in any way I can to fight against it. Of course, I'm here in North Alabama, so oftentimes it feels a little, I feel a little defeated in my particular neck of the woods, considering how red the state is and how gerrymandered it is. But doing what I can. Just to let everybody know in the chat, we are doing this stream today as a fundraising stream. I've created an ongoing fundraising thing. There's no real goal that's set, and Casey has already donated some money to it. Thank you so much there, honey.
Iconic. Absolute queen shit, if we're allowed to swear. If not, sorry, but I didn't check
beforehand. Totally. if I mean, if you watch my channel, sometimes I say worse things. So I mean, just feel free to say whatever. We do
Trying to keep it
appreciate any of
classy.
the. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So if anybody wants to help American Atheists out, if you like what Nick is saying here tonight, consider donating. We'll keep the fundraising thing open, and we'll probably do a few more streams to help fund American Atheists at least a little bit, because I really do love what y'all do. And I was actually this is really a sidebar. I went to the only American Atheist convention that I went to is the 2015 one in Memphis.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I remember seeing you there.
Would have been right. I mean, I was only there for maybe 2 years by that time. That was, I think, my second conference, maybe, or third conference. So very fresh. It was a lot.
But but prior to you becoming president, I had heard about you, just in American Atheists in general. So I was really happy to hear when you became president. But I'm kind of curious, what does American Atheists do kind of in general? Like, what is the organization's goals, and what do y'all usually do during the year?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, over the years, I mean, American Atheists has been around for almost 60 years now. It'll be 60 years next year. And so throughout the course of the organization, we've evolved, as any, longstanding organization does. We try to rise to meet the moment for what our community needs. We are, it's not the Catholic Church. We're not prescribing what atheism is to people. We're doing our best to help represent our community, the people that are our members, the people that are members of our affiliate groups, where we see the atheist community in general. And so what we've done as an organization has varied over our history. In the earliest days of Madalyn Murray O'Hair, it was a lot about just raising awareness of the fact that atheists existed. Now that's much less of a concern because people know atheists exist. We still have to destigmatize our community. We still have to break down the stereotypes and the negative views that people have about us. But now we're at a point where atheists and atheist groups can start to really flex their muscle, especially in American civic culture. The recent election in Arizona. I think someone in the chat mentioned that our next conference is going to be in Phoenix this upcoming April. In the most recent election in Arizona, the governor's election, Katie Hobbs, who ended up victorious in that race, won something like 65% of the non-religious vote for that race. No religious organization except for the Jewish community voted more strongly for the Democrat, unless you really get sort of nitty-gritty with Black evangelical Protestants. Yes, vote more for Democrats. But if you just look along religious lines, the nuns are much more likely to vote for the Democratic candidate. And frankly, they're much more likely to vote if you look at atheists and agnostics. And there's this idea that people have that's incorrect, that atheists and agnostics are not politically engaged. And that's simply not true. Atheists and agnostics are the single most politically engaged group out there. We're far more likely to donate to candidates. We're far more likely to attend protests. We're far more likely to petition, attend government meetings. It's like literally every category, atheists and agnostics are more likely to be involved. And so what we're trying to do now is help atheists flex that muscle. We want to make sure that our views are heard in our halls of government, that elected officials know they have to be accountable to us because we're a valuable constituency, a valuable and growing constituency, and that public policy, represents our values. It's not about, pushing religion or religious people out of government. That's not possible. There's still a majority of Americans are religious. And it's not possible to fully say we can't talk about religion at all in government. Obviously, that's not the case. What it's about is equality. And it's about making sure that good policy is out there that protects everyone's religious rights and the right to not believe a particular religion. And so we're looking at ways that we can make our lives better, make the world around us better, and approach that from a secular point of view, evidence-based point of view, and really make sure that atheists have a voice. And so everything we do is about that. It's about making sure atheists are heard in all of these discussions. And we primarily focus on the politics, the policy side of things. But we also do a lot of work on just basic understanding of our community, studying our community, making sure that people know what the experience is like to be an atheist in America. It's certainly not easy. You're in Alabama, you know this, where people lose their jobs, even though you're not supposed to be able to lose your job due to religion. People still get fired because they're an atheist or because they refuse to do worship services at their gardening job or at their landscaping job, and that's unacceptable to us. Children are still kicked out of their homes for being non-religious. Schools and universities still discriminate against us. It's one of the things that we know is out there, and American Atheists has been leading on gathering that data so we can show that to policymakers and really point to the problem and offer a solution. And no one else is doing that, and we think it's really important to really promote understanding of our community and break down those barriers so that the next generation has it a little bit easier than my generation, and the generation after that has it even easier. It's all about incremental change. It's about building something that's going to stand the test of time, and putting our money where our mouth is, where if we genuinely believe that this is the one life we have to live, then we have to work to make it better. And that's what it comes down to for me as a person is what can we do today to make it a little bit easier tomorrow.
Yeah, and I have to say that's one thing that I have in mind here for my channel and my efforts is to try to, put a very I guess just really I guess fight for not the atheist cause or anything, but fight for atheists in general, like as
People.
far as people in general.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I mean, it's, I always joke about this. There's a reason it's called American Atheists and not American Atheism, right? Mm-hmm. We're about the people, and we take our cues from the people in our community. We do our best to represent, obviously it's, atheists herding cats. Atheists are very diverse and have a lot of different viewpoints and have different things they prioritize, but there's a ton of commonality. There are a ton of values that we all share, and we do our best to represent those folks. And everything that we do programmatically, whether it's getting involved in state legislation, proposing new legislation and getting it passed to make sure that people, for example, have access to evidence-based treatment for addiction. Instead of being forced into AA or NA, they can go to a different one that isn't religious. Or working with partners to ban child marriage, which is still going on in 43 states in the United States, or whether it's making sure that people, when they go to the hospital, know if their hospital is going to deny them certain types of care simply because of the hospital's religious belief and not tell them that they're not offering that treatment. We want to make sure that people know when religion is influencing their lives, whether it's mandatory, whether it's coercive, or whether it's just something that's kind of in the background. People have a right to know and to be able to live their lives free from that coercive part of religion. That's what we do. That's what we try to do all the time. And that takes a lot of different types of work. That takes a lot of tools in our toolbox to do that. It's not just in the courts. It's not just in legislatures. It's not just data. It's all of them.
Now, one of the common pushbacks that I have gotten in the past is, well, can't you really just ignore that? Like, you could just not do this, that, or the other. Have you ever faced that kind of opposition?
Yeah, I mean, I think people now are finally starting to see just how insidious and how widespread the influence of really dangerous sort of Christianity and religion in the United States is. The ideology of white Christian nationalism is really a threat to, as my friend Andrew Seidel says, it's a threat to America. It's a threat to our way of life. It's a threat to our American values. Pick up his book, by the way, his books, great books. It's this ideology that's about raw power. It's about, it's right there. It's the red one. Yeah. red. Yeah. It's one of those things that people are starting to see it. They're seeing that these people are not interested in any sort of, moral foundation. Their moral foundation is absolute power. What can they do to hang on to their way of life, by which they mean the right to discriminate, or hold power against, regardless of whether or not they win the most votes. That's at the core of this ideology. And they're seeing their grip on our society weaken and in some cases fail. And so what they're doing is flailing around, trying to grasp on anything they can, build walls between our secular society and their own religious morality in a way that insulates them and makes them unaccountable to the rest of us. And that's no way to order a society. That's no way to order a nation. And so what we need to do is make sure that everyone's playing by the same rules and really push back. And there's no way to do that. There's no way to insulate yourself from that, because what they're doing is creating alternative sort of systems where they can just do whatever they want, where the laws no longer apply to them. We saw it in Arkansas in this most recent election, where they tried to pass through a ballot initiative, a constitutional amendment in Arkansas that would have said that government can't take any action if it infringes on someone's ability to practice their religion. Now, they tried to justify this by saying, oh, it's actually about pandemics. You know, these overreaching big government came in and shut down our churches. Well, never mind the fact that in Arkansas, they didn't really shut down the churches. They opened churches back up almost immediately. But they said, oh, we need this because in other states, they made it impossible for us to worship, which isn't true, by the way, that churches were much more likely to have their doors open back up much more quickly than a secular gathering was. Like our events couldn't have taken place in certain states or certain regions while churches could. You know, we can talk about the constitutionality of that some other time. But, you know, they said, oh, no, we can't have that at all. You can't have any law that impacts our ability to practice our religion unless it's compelling. The government has compelling interests. It's the least restrictive way possible. And that's crazy because there are always less restrictive ways of doing things, but you don't want to have to just jump through those hoops every single time you pass a law. We're talking about things as simple as non-discrimination protections or the fire code. Like, oh, well, the government has an interest in making sure your building doesn't burn down, but is it really the least restrictive way if we have to go in there and potentially fine you if you're out of compliance? Well, no, maybe the least restrictive way would be the government just pays for it in a church, right? Like that's what we're talking about here. Exempting churches from literally every bit of law, exempting religious people from every bit of law, as long as they have a religious reason for objecting to it. They want to create that type of society. And so you can't sit on the sidelines and pretend that this isn't going to touch you no matter where you live, because they're trying this everywhere. And by the way, it's happening at the national Supreme Court, at the federal state court, Supreme Court, that 6 out of 9 justices have bought into this ideology and have decided that the facts don't matter, the law doesn't matter. They're just going to rule in favor of religious complainants whenever they can, and facts be damned, because all they're concerned about is power. And because they have 6 votes, they can even lose 1 person, and that's terrifying. And we're seeing the side effects of that right now with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, with any number of other religious cases. This is not stopping, and so we have to be smart. We have to really fight wherever we can, and everybody needs to be involved. Even if you think you're in a quote unquote safe state from this, the reach of this really goes far beyond just, you know, it's not Alabama, it's not just Arkansas. These sorts of policies are everywhere in the country, unfortunately.
Oh yeah, they definitely are. And I'm just kind of curious. I know you kind of said a lot about like what Christian nationalism is right there, but I'm wondering, aside from the hot button issues like, you know, LGBTQ rights and abortion, what would you consider to be the Christian nationalist agenda, and why do you think it's a problem, this agenda?
Yeah, I mean, so Christian nationalism is at its core the false belief that the United States is or was a Christian nation, and that it should either continue or be returned to that state. That America should be a nation where Christianity is entitled to special treatment, Christians are entitled to a higher place in American society, that there is like a hierarchy, frankly, of religions, and that Christians sit atop it. And by the way, it's a certain type of Christians. And so we often will say like white Christian nationalism, because often this ideology is really wrapped up in race and racism. Because when they say Christianity, they certainly don't mean, you know, the Christianity of Martin Luther King Jr. or of or any sort of black pastor, the Reverend William Barber. They don't mean that type of Christianity. They mean the Christianity of Jerry Falwell, where you can, sleep around with your pool boy and, cover up affairs. Like, that's their Christianity, right? Like, that's the kind of Christianity they mean. They mean a very robust political Christianity where, a certain type of like national pride, not like jingoism, nationalism is wrapped up in there, and that there's something inherent about being Christian that is to be American. So in order to be a true American, you need to be a Christian, but also in order to be a real Christian, you need to be American. And that those two things, that America is entitled to some sort of special position as well. And it's very wrapped up in the two things. And it's really dangerous because, you end up where people can't make any sort of compromise in politics because they're getting their marching orders directly from God. So that's really terrifying. And, it's this ideology that is really, really focused on maintaining and protecting power above all else. And if there's a ton of really good data out there. I'd encourage folks to take a look at the work that's been done by Samuel Perry and Andrew Whitehead, as well as Ryan Burge, like looking at the ideology of white Christian nationalism and white Christian nationalists and the things that they value. And the things that they value are things like having special treatment for them, the belief that white people are the most discriminated group in the country, for example, that white Christians face the most discrimination. They're much more likely to oppose not just illegal immigration, but legal immigration. They're far more likely to oppose any type of gun control, any type of regulation on firearms. They're far more likely to support absolute bans on abortion. They're far less likely to support LGBTQ rights. They're even less likely to support things like the idea that is it okay with you if a close family member were to marry a person of a different race? They're less likely to support that as well. So there's a lot wrapped up in there between the idea of like a superior religion, a superior race, and a superior nationality. And that's why it's white Christian nationalism. So it's a really dangerous ideology that has a lot baked in there. It's not entirely theological. It's barely theological. It's mostly political. And there's just a ton of really interesting data out there and so many books that folks should read. And I strongly recommend, as I said, Samuel Perry, Andrew Whitehead, Kristen DeMay has a great book called John Wayne. It's like John Wayne and the Cross, or it's something about John Wayne and crosses. It's all I can remember right now. Great book. There's a ton out there of really informative things that describe this ideology that really dig in on it. As well as Andrew Seidel's books, if you want to talk about like the legal and political side as well. So, yeah.
Yeah. I know Andrew Seidel, at one time on his Twitter feed, he had like a list of books that are like essential reads for this particular topic area. And I think the John Wayne book was on there, as well as, a lot of books that detail the rise of Christian nationalism. And, I'm kind of curious, like one of the problems that I see, like as far as why Christian nationalism is a problem, is that it's convinced a segment of the American public that bad arguments are good arguments. And like the one thing that I'm thinking of is a popular argument about the First Amendment to the in the Bill of Rights, and that's where they just read half of the line of the separation of church and state, and thinks that it's like, well, the state can't influence the church,
right?
But that doesn't mean that the church can't influence the state, and so that's how they try to get past it. I'm kind of curious, what do you think about these new arguments that seem to be like just insanely bad arguments, but like they're gaining popularity because they've got people like David Barton, and he's the first one that came to mind.
It's a good one to come to mind, though. If you talk about junk arguments,
what do you think about all these sort of new junk arguments that are being purported as through churches and just everywhere right now?
Yeah, so I mean, people are hearing this stuff, this crap, every single Sunday in their church. They're hearing it from, you mentioned David Barton. David Barton is sort of like ground zero. He is a super spreader of the pandemic of misinformation on history. I mean, David Barton is a guy whose fake Christian history book was so bad that his fly-by-night crappy publisher had to pull it off the shelves because it was just too false. And if your Christian publisher is like, oh, buddy, your fake Christian history book is too fake, we need to take it down, you've really crossed into a really bizarre place.
I was actually able to snag that book on Kindle.
Oh my gosh!
before I guess it got pulled, but I've got it on Kindle. But I'll let you continue.
I mean, it's a dumpster fire. It's made up. It's complete BS. And so like people get this every single day, and then they go on to Facebook and share, their memes with their uncles or whatever, in sort of their boomer Facebook group, saying like, oh, I did my research. If you read David Barton, you should read David Barton. And then they email me. And I get emails from people that are like, excuse me, the First Amendment says that you can't interfere with anyone's religion. And you reply back and say, actually, it says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, prohibiting the free exercise thereof. ... It's like, aha, I knew you'd say that. I have this translation. And this is, by the way, an actual email that I once got. I have this translation. And what it says is this. I was like, buddy, I don't know why you think you need a translation of the First Amendment. It was only written like 250 years ago or so. Like, it's not written in Latin. You don't need a translation. This is not the New Testament. You don't need your study guide that has a translation of anything. The language of the First Amendment is exactly this. Like, this is what it says. And, people who say to us, like, how dare you interfere? You American atheists interfere with people's free exercise of religion. And I say, let me stop you right there. Would you concede that American atheists is not, in fact, the government? Because and that we're not interfering with your religion. We're talking to you. We're putting out there alternate ideas or, challenging your preconceptions. Like, they don't even think. And this is part of what we're seeing with the rise of Christian nationalism is they're not attending church. So these folks that are more identifying now as white evangelicals, it doesn't actually correspond with an increase in their attendance to church. They don't actually attend church that much more often. What they do is they listen to people that use evangelical as like a sort of moral shorthand of like, I'm on your team. And what that team often is a political team. It means I'm on Team Trump, right? I'm on Team Red. They use it much more as that sort of evocative thing of this is a value statement much more than a theological one. And people who are like progressive and evangelical in their worldview are like, oh no, what's happening to our religion right now? And are really appalled. And so a lot of them are not self-identifying as evangelicals anymore because of that as well. So there's like this whole weird spiritual combat thing going on that is not terribly interesting to us as atheists. Like, you guys have been dealing with this for thousands of years. Like, leave us alone, please. But what we're seeing here is people are not engaged in critical thinking. They're not engaged in critical reasoning because they, quite frankly, don't know how sometimes. They're not taught that. And part of the Christian nationalist project is gutting the American education system, is making public education non-existent, is taking money from public education and redirecting it to private schools that are religious, that are free to discriminate, that have no bounds on what the curriculum is. We're seeing that from the Supreme Court. It's homeschooling people and teaching them from books that literally show Adam and Eve riding dinosaurs in the history and the geology section, right? It's teaching children that David Barton history instead of talking at all about the civil rights movement. They sort of like talk about how Christianity coming to America saved all of these godless heathens and brought some dignity and some civilization to these savages. I mean, like, this is what books that are being taught in America right now are telling our children. And then we wonder why people can't reason themselves out of a paper bag. Well, that's part of it. Is we're not teaching that, or we're gutting our public education system and directing more and more kids into this crap private religious or homeschooled environment where even if people who had a good reason to homeschool their kids because, for example, they have a child with special needs and they want to devote even more attention to them, or they have a child who's, really gifted and they want to devote special attention to them. They have a hard time, for example, finding curriculum to homeschool that isn't Adam and Eve riding dinosaurs and David Barton sanctioned history. And so like these tentacles of Christian nationalism are really infiltrating all over the place, in education, in our health system, in everything, in our political system, that it's inescapable. And so people find these arguments and they're really reassuring to them, that they're like a warm hug, they're a nice cozy blanket. They're not interested in having their preconceptions challenged at all. What they're interested in is having people tell them things that confirm what they already believe and give them more power, and that give them a reason to, like an animating principle, a thing that makes them feel powerful and safe and secure and gives them somebody to direct their ire at. And frankly, the target of that often are LGBTQ people, are us as atheists, are immigrants, are people who look differently or believe differently or act differently than us. And that's a really powerful way of inciting people, of getting them really riled up and pointing them in a direction that's useful for a certain type of politics that you want to run. But unfortunately, it's also really dangerous and really corrosive to the fiber of American society. And that's a really terrifying place. And it's what we're seeing right now all over the place.
Now, thinking back to you saying that, that evangelicals or Christians nowadays are not attending church more, but yet they're still becoming sort of radicalized in this Christian nationalism. Do you think that the rise of social media and the popularity of it has sort of contributed to that?
Yeah, I mean, social media is an interesting one because it's been really great for our community as well. It allows people to find other people who believe or don't believe the things that they believe. It allows us to build communities across space. It allows somebody, an atheist in Wyoming or an atheist in Alabama or an atheist in South Carolina, to connect with each other and build a robust community. And that's fantastic. So I don't want to pretend that social media is like this giant boogeyman that is the cause of all these problems, because it's also a force for tremendous good. But yes, people can find a community and an echo chamber for themselves that reinforces all of their worst impulses, just like you can find one that reinforces your best impulses. It's sort of it's a neutral tool that can be used in many different ways, sometimes for harm, especially when we're talking about, algorithmic amplification of, videos that, you start down this rabbit hole of, oh, I'm very interested in the moon landing. And suddenly you're getting things about how the earth is flat and the moon landing was fake. And then from there, you're getting things about how vaccines are fake. And from there, you're getting things about, white genocide and how, it takes you down this really dangerous path very quickly. And that's sort of concerning. So, I don't want to pretend that, that it's not that social media is the thing causing this. It's also not the case that social media is innocent on this either. We need to think about reasons or ways that we can, work on the algorithms, and maybe incentivize the social media companies to look at different metrics in the way that they're doing this. So it's not just eyes on screen is the only thing you care about, or minutes watching videos, or just, how long people are glued to their monitor, because that's where you get into problems. That's, when you're selecting for outrage and engagement, that's what's happening here. And so, that's a problem. But social media, we've seen, we've all seen this, where someone in our family, someone we care about, coworker, goes down this path toward radicalization almost entirely because of social media. We saw it with QAnon. We saw it with a lot of the COVID conspiracy theories. It's really devastating for people. But at the same time, there's no easy solution here. So there's a lot of work still to do.
Yeah. One of the common criticisms I get as a content creator is I get charged with boosting people, like when I would respond to, like, let's say Greg Locke, Joshua Feuerstein, or even David Barton, I get charged with possibly boosting awareness of their rhetoric or their bad attitude or their bad information. But what I've found is that you know, without, because I've sworn off Greg Locke and Joshua Forstein, but they've only grown in popularity.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, what is your take on that? Do you think that it's important to push back, like content creators like me or other people in the atheist vertical here on YouTube and other places on social media, or do you think that like silence or ignoring those kind of people, do you think that that is a better tactic?
Yeah. I mean, again, this is one where there's no easy answer, because it's entirely possible that sometimes, providing a platform for someone boosts their credibility in a way that you don't want to do. But these are people, Greg Locke, Josh Farstein, all of them have tremendous reach already. And so pushing back on them, all that does is provide a dissenting voice. And especially if you're talking about video, it gives a potential rebuttal, where if somebody hopefully is going through and they're going down this path toward radicalization because they're in this echo chamber where they're getting recommended Greg Locke videos. Not that Greg Locke is on YouTube anymore. And so, if they're seeing all of that stuff and, maybe, just maybe, they'll see your video there too. And so, oh, let me see what this atheist has to say. And then they watch it and they're like, oh, well, that guy seemed pretty reasonable, So there's no easy answer here. It's one of those things that you just have to be cognizant of and think a lot about and just kind of run through it in your mind of like, okay, is this someone who is some little nobody that isn't going to have any platform unless I boost them? Or is this somebody that has a platform that me going in there and, engaging in some, YouTube fisticuffs is going to take them down a peg or two? That's the calculus that we do all the time. Is we American atheists try not to engage, these people. You often hear it called like nut picking, where you pick like one person that's said some unhinged thing, and they're a nobody. Like, we're going to ignore that, But when the Catholic League, or when the Family Research Council, or when Alliance Defending Freedom says stuff, we have to push back on that, because these people have tremendous power. These people have just a huge megaphone, a huge platform already. We're not adding to that. What we're doing is rebutting it. And so you just have to think about that. And there's no easy answer. There's no one size fits all. I often get accused of not like having a pithy answer to some of these things, because the answer is almost always this really unsatisfying, well, it depends. And so that's unfortunately the truth, though. And I hate to, blow smoke up people's ass and tell them like this is always the answer, when the fact is that it depends. And there's a lot of research out there about how you can de-radicalize people. And so I would certainly encourage people to follow and look into, ways of combating disinformation, best practices from people who are subject matter experts in that, which I'm not. And so do that, and then think about how you're going to combat that disinformation, because it isn't simple. And it is easy, just what, like you said, to actually cause people to go down that path. And that's what we don't want to do, is contribute to that environment that's creating more problems. And so how do we do that? Well, listen to somebody who is an expert, and that's not me. And so I can just point you in those directions.
Right. Yeah. And I have to say, I'd rather take a, well, it depends kind of answer over a like hard one way or another answer, because I feel like the, well, it depends is kind of, at least an honest answer that gives you, multiple angles to look at there.
Nuance, and the world is complicated. The world is not black and white. The world is full of gray. And that's the truth about so many things. People will say, hey, isn't religion universally bad? And I'll be like, well, it depends. Yes, it's true. I would want people to believe only true things. And I genuinely, want people to understand that religion plays an important place in people's lives, an important role in people's lives. But by the same token, we want people to believe true things. We want them to know that they can experience many of those same things without religion. But not all religion is this like power trip that especially white Christian nationalist style American Christianity is. There's a lot of other types of religion out there that, yes, are also not accurate. But at the same time are not damaging in the same way that power structures of American Christianity is. And so I try to always, impress that upon people, that there are different ways that people do religion. And we shouldn't paint with this huge brush that, creates enemies out of people that we share 99% of our values with. We just disagree with on this one thing. And so that's really important to do.
Yeah. I just wanted to highlight Shannon's comment here. Sometimes I get email. Fucking killed her. And I have to agree. I saw that tweet of yours too. And I had to laugh my ass off at it because it's just so casual. Like, I get emails sometimes.
Yeah. For anyone who didn't see this, I got an email, and I think it was in reference to the Colorado shooting, but it was basically like, because of teaching evolution in schools, your godlessness has caused people to not value human life. And it's like, my dude, you're the one who thinks this is all a dress rehearsal for another time. If the only reason you're not running, and I think Penn Jillette said this years ago in his This I Believe, which is like one of the first times I heard the word atheist in any media, by the way. It literally like 2003, maybe. I mean, it was so long ago. It was an NPR piece. It was called This I Believe. And he had to sort of flip atheism on its head because, yes, he conceded atheism is I don't believe, but I'm going to say I believe there is no God, and they forced him to do that. And he gave this really interesting sort of defense of atheism that I had never heard before, and it was one of the first things again that I remember hearing about atheism. And one of the things he said was like, and this is not uncommon. A lot of people have said this, but it was when I heard it first was, hey, the only reason you're not killing people, if the reason I don't go around killing and raping people is because I know that it's bad to go around killing and raping people. If the only reason you do it is because you fear hell, this says a lot more about you as a person than it does about me, right? And if the only reason that this guy who emailed me isn't killing people is because he's worried that God's going to send him to hell, yikes! Like, what are we doing here? I'm not afraid of eternal damnation, and I'm not going around killing people. So let's talk about our moral compasses, dude.
Now you spoke on this a little bit earlier, but maybe you can be a bit more specific. What is the role that American atheists are taking to combat Christian nationalism right now?
Yeah, I see a lot of our role as sort of convening and bringing together people from all sorts of different communities and movements. We've been talking, about Christian nationalism for 5-6 years now. We started talking about Project Blitz, which was this state level policy campaign to inject Christian nationalism into American public policy all the way back in 2017. That's now 5 years ago, which is horrifying to say, by the way. And so, we're the ones who started saying, you really need to pay attention to this. Attacks on LGBTQ people, attacks on reproductive access, attacks on public education. All of these are linked to this ideology. Look, right here, it says they have this book it's full of model policies. And those model policies say we're going to take away the rights of LGBT people. We're going to take away the right to abortion, and we're going to gut public schools. Look, it's right here. And finally, we convened this coalition. And that's kind of how we see our role in this, is bringing together people and saying, yes, here is the commonality. It's right here. Here's the book. They put it out. You can see exactly what their game plan is. And so we have connections. We have really good relationships with not just people in the atheist and secular sphere. I mean, we have great relationship with FFRF and the American Humanist Association and Center for Inquiry and the Secular Coalition and Secular Students and Americans United, and I'm running out of breath. But all those groups we have great relationships with. But then we also have really great relationships with other civil rights focused groups. So with the Human Rights Campaign, with the National LGBTQ Task Force, with Lambda Legal, with the National Women's Law Center, the National Center for Lesbian Rights, the National Center for Transgender Equality, ACLU, Planned Parenthood, NARAL, RCRC, the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice. I mean, just the list kind of goes on. And so we put together a coalition called Blitz Watch, which was aimed at monitoring and pushing back on Project Blitz specifically, but that was sort of, it's sort of morphed now into a larger project around Christian nationalism writ large, that brought together all of these groups and said, listen, all of our public policy areas, all of the things that we care about, all the attacks on our issues that are happening at states, they're all connected by this one group, this one ideology that's well-funded, sort of secretive, but also they got a little bold a little overly bold and kind of shot out in there and into the public light, and then went, whoa, whoops, and then scampered back in. And so like we have to confront this, and we have to stand together, and we have to realize this is all part of the same thing and work together, because we all share so many values. Like if you ask the atheists who we represent, if you ask the average atheist, they care about protecting LGBTQ equality. They care about protecting access to abortion. They care about the rights of women. They care about all of these topics. They care about schools, public schools. We need to do something about this. And so let's be a place for people to get plugged in, so they can work on all of these issues in their states, in their local communities. Let's be that for people. And so, I mean, that's the single biggest thing that we can do is provide that sort of connection point for all these people who are atheists who don't quite know where to go to get more engaged. That's a big one for us. But also, you know, groups will come to us and they'll say, listen, we can't say that religion is the issue here because we're scared to do that. And we'll be like, oh, no problem. We got that. We can say absolutely Christian nationalism is the problem here and call that out. And because we're subject matter experts on that. We know what the boundaries are for the law. We know what the court is likely to do on things. And we know where it's appropriate to push back and say, like, listen, like, even if the court hits us back a little bit here, or even if the court, you know, strikes this down, this is worth going after. This is worth being bold on, especially in states where, you know, we can do it through state law. That's where, you know, I really think that we have a lot to offer, because, you know, this is not a time for timidity. This is a time for action. We've got too much going on here. The threats are too big for us to, you know, kind of walk on eggshells on these issues. We have to be bold. We have to be smart, but we have to be bold. And so that's, you know, as far as what we're doing, that's a lot of it is convening these gatherings, convening these coalitions, giving people really good model policies, giving them really good advice on how to construct policies, and finding consensus so that we can actually do something here that moves the needle toward equality and away from this injection of Christian nationalism into our policy, push back on that and move things in a positive direction. We can't do it alone. We rely on our coalition partners, both within and outside of the secular community. And, you know, we've been really successful at building those relationships and getting people involved all across the country.
Awesome. I'm so glad that you guys are doing that over there, because I think that a firm, united front is probably the best way to combat, you know, all these bad ideas that are getting,
absolutely,
you know, pushed around. Now I'm kind of curious, because, you know, going back to something that you said earlier, about how, you know, you guys have been kind of focusing on Christian nationalism since about 2017. Do you think that Christian nationalism is like, has always been a threat to the US, or is this something that's kind of new that's sprung up?
So the ideology, the undergirding of this ideology has been around forever. I mean, if you read a lot of the books that I recommended, or any of them that talk about the history of Christian nationalism, you see a through line from they'll often call it like the slaveholders' religion, where, you know, they justified their support of slavery through the Bible, and they said, you know, part of being a good Christian is supporting slavery. And then it sort of morphed a little bit after the Civil War and into sort of the you know, post-Civil War Jim Crow era of justifying segregation through religion, that, you know, God created the races differently, therefore they should be separated. And then when integration was being, you know, required after Brown versus Board, they sort of said, oh, wait a second, how can we get around this? Oh, I know, religious schools. So a lot of the foundations of, you know, the modern Christian nationalist movement, those seeds were sown in the early civil rights era, setting up these segregation academies. And you can trace a through line of like person to person to person, where you watch the people move from like one justification to the next, or one sort of narrative of how they frame Christianity to the next. And so it's not that Christian nationalism is new, it's that sort of its expression has changed over the years. But there's this historic through line that I would absolutely encourage people to look into. So some, again, really great books that I'm sure are linked. I saw someone in the chat linked to Andrew's selection of books that talk about the history there. Some really important work that's been done elucidating, that side of things. And when people see the sort of racist underpinnings, it's not that we're like talking about race because we enjoy talking about racism. It's that it's a fact. And even if it makes us as, white people uncomfortable to talk about what other white people were doing in terms of advancing racism in America, we got to talk about it. We benefit from it, but this is out there. It's right on the pages of history. This is not some secret anything. Like, this is right there. And it's important for Christians to confront this. It's important for them to sort of take stock and say, oh man, our religion has really been used for some bad stuff in American history. And often that American Christianity is used for pushing discrimination. And historically it's been used to push discrimination against Black Americans. It's still being used for that purpose, but now it's also being used to push discrimination against LGBTQ people and also and women and religious minorities. I mean, that's at the core of it, is you finding a justification for your religio-racial ethnic supremacy in a holy book, because then it gives you some credibility beyond just like, oh, I'm some guy and I think, and I'm a racist, right? No. It's not me that believes this. It's God. I'm just telling you what God has said. It's that our race is superior, that our religion is, like, that gives you some cover, right? That's not unique to America. It's not unique to Christianity. It's not unique to white Christianity. It's all over the place. But here in the United States, the people who have just enough power to and are really hell-bent on preserving that power tend to be white Christian nationalists. And so it's not new, but it's just taking different forms all the time. People really need to see it for what it is, and it's really dangerous and damaging, especially in a pluralistic, multiracial, multi-religious, multi-ethnic nation like ours. The idea that one religion, one race is superior is really a threat, and we need to confront it.
Yeah. Now, one of the books in the list, which Casey, my wife, she's been putting the several links over there in the side chat. But one of the books specifically outlines the exact thing that you're talking about here, how race and racism is intricately linked to Christian nationalism, and that there's like this whole there's this whole historical connection between the two. And I remember one of the big groups like right there in maybe the 60s or the 70s is the moral majority. And they kind of I don't know if they got the ball really rolling on it, but that was kind of like one of the first big organized movements to push Christian nationalist kind of rhetoric through the government.
Yeah, and it really sort of sprung into the forefront. But again, it's important to know that those groups had like been around for a long time. It's just they sort of saw an opportunity with the political realignment that was happening at the time, in the wake of the civil rights era, in the wake of, especially in, the Southern strategy and what was going on with Nixon. Like there's just our nation is full of a lot of like confluences of circumstances leading to things that last and reshape our politics for like 50 years to come, 60 years, 100 years to come, where just something lined up in a really unfortunate way, or fortunate, depending on how you think about it. But in this case, we'll say really unfortunate way. And you end up just completely fundamentally locking in a certain sort of like power structure into American politics and American religion for like decades. And that's exactly it. Is they see an opportunity, they seize it, and they really focus in on it. That's what happened in the case of the moral majority, was weaponizing religion around like one or two very specific policy areas. And by the way, it wasn't, a lot of people say, oh, it's abortion. It was actually predates abortion. The first version of it was around race, and it was around segregation, and it was around integration of schools. That was like one of the first things. And then it sort of pivoted from that to abortion. And that was actually like, in the Roe era in like the late 70s, late 70s, early 80s, that pivot happened. But before that, in the 50s and 60s, it was about segregation. It was about perpetuating racial segregation. So yeah, it's a wild history. Absolutely encourage people to dig into that. One of them that I was really thinking about was Robert Jones's book, White Too Long. That's a really good one in terms of understanding what's going on from like a modern sort of polling perspective. You know, Robert Jones is, I think, is he PPP or PRI rather? I think he's PRI. The Public Religion Research Institute is what it used to be called. I think now it's just PRI. And he's got a really great book called A White Too Long that really digs in on this. But you know, we've sort of talked about white evangelical racism as well as a great book from Anthea Butler, who is brilliant and or somebody I'm really a fan of. So yeah, dig in on those books. Andrew's reading list is great. I actually recommend, I think, like almost all of these books on my website has like almost this, there's a select group of people that really write interesting and provocative and helpful things. Start there.
Now, you know, speaking of the history of Christian nationalism, given that it's kind of been on the steady rise, would you agree that maybe, you know, after or maybe shortly before 2016, it seems like there was a sharp rise in this kind of rhetoric? I'm wondering, what do you think about that? Like, do you think that there was or wasn't a sharp rise, or what do you think about these developments that's been happening for the past 8, you know, between 6 or 8 years?
Yeah, I think a lot of it can be traced back to Donald Trump, that there's this like sort of transactional thing where white Christian nationalists really revel in this transactional relationship with political leaders, that, you know, and you know, Donald Trump's superpower is a lack of shame, but also is just like making subtext text, just saying out loud what so many of these people were saying. That's a big part of it, is he's saying the things that I'm feeling is sort of how they justify it. Like he said out loud the impolite things that they think all Americans believe in their heart of hearts, right? They think that all of us agree with Donald Trump secretly. It's just we're too polite or we're too like woke or whatever to say it, that, you know, Mexicans are sending rapists and, you know, blah, 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 blah. Like they think we believe that, and we don't, but they think we do. And he's just saying it out loud. So why are you being, he's honest, right? That's where that whole idea of Donald Trump is just, he's being honest. He's somebody that you can trust. That's where that notion comes from. It's not all the things he just lies about because he can. And that, by the way, is also a flex. Like that's a power thing of like, I'm going to lie and make you repeat the lie. And like that's a warning sign of fascism, but it's very much a power thing of like, I'm gonna make you do this, right? And you know, it's true that Donald Trump wasn't the first one, but he really weaponized it and really had, you know, again, for all of his faults, one of his superpowers was sort of knowing what people wanted to hear on that sort of thing, and weaponizing that in a really perverted way, or a really perverse way. That's dangerous, and gave people sort of that permission structure to just say that stuff out loud, which is why we have the Marjorie Taylor Greenes and the Lauren Boeberts and the, you know, the people being like, I'm a proud Christian nationalist, or writing books that are like, you know, in defense of Christian nationalism, where then they go out there and tweet like, you know, I don't know that women should be able to vote, like things like that, or, you know, like they say things like that, and it's just like, oh my gosh, you just like said that out loud, or yeah, you know, I don't see any reason why we would ban Muslims from the country. Well, maybe though, or, you know, we just don't want you doing your weird prayers, Hindus, in our like, they just say that stuff out loud, that they think that Christianity, the First Amendment, was only intended to protect Christians, and that we sort of, because they're nice guys, they'll continue to let like Hindus and Buddhists practice, but not because they have a constitutional right to do so, but because they don't see any reason to like kick them all out. Like, they just say that stuff because they think that people in their heart of hearts want to hear that stuff just flatly said out loud, that everyone secretly believes it. They're just not willing to say it. So we just need to say it. And I mean, it's simply not true that everybody believes this. In fact, the overwhelming majority of people in America repudiate that and find it horrific, but, you know, they just think we're all lying, I guess. And so that's, I think, you know, where there was that big pivot point. It's not that Donald Trump created it. It's not that Donald Trump was the cause of it. It's that him finding success because like 10,000 people spread across 3 states flipped, like if the votes had flipped or like whatever, if a handful of votes had flipped and he had lost, maybe we wouldn't have the same thing. But because he won that election, he won the Electoral College that year, people thought, oh, there must be some special thing here. And we're now still dealing with the repercussions of that. We're still dealing with the side effects, and we're going to see it apparently now for another 4 years, or at least 3 years until the next election, right? We're going to keep dealing with this.
Now, I'm kind of curious. Do you think that it's a weird phenomenon that they fell in behind Donald Trump, considering like all of the supposed, well, not supposed, but all of the moral failings that evangelicals are supposedly like very vehemently against?
Yeah. No, not at all. Because it's not about the actual like moral precepts. It's about power, and it's entirely transactional. And so, there was this, there've been study after study after study that like evangelicals, they polled evangelicals and they polled the nuns. And it's like, is it important for your leader to be a good person or a moral person? And you watch the trend line, and it's like, so it was like 80% of them said, yes, your leaders need to be good. And then all of a sudden, when Donald Trump got elected, it was like, oh, nope, only like 10% said needs to be a good person. And then when Joe Biden got elected, it was like, no, 80% need to be good people. And it's entirely because of it. It's a political thing. It has nothing to do with the actual moral guidance. Like, we're not, and they even said it. Some of the pastors who backed him said, listen, we're not electing a pastor here. We're not electing Pope. We're electing a political leader, and we're electing a fighter. He might, the sort of way that people structure this is, well, he might be a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch, right? And he might be a crude, crass asshole, but he's our crude, crass asshole, and he's going to push back against the woke left, right? Like that's all they care about. And so, if we're talking about it in that way, it doesn't make sense to say, oh, he's immoral, because all that matters is he's preserving their power, and that's what ultimately Christian nationalism is about, is the preservation of power, not about anything having to do with moral leadership. And it's why people, especially young people, are looking at it with just like abject horror, going, oh my gosh, this ideology provides no guidance for life. It's entirely hollow and empty. It's entirely about power. And I don't like that. And that's why you're seeing young people leave in droves.
Okay. Now, do you think, I don't know if maybe you can comment on it or not, but do you think that the evangelicals are still going to find value in that transactional sort of relationship with Trump now? Or because I know that a lot of people that Trump has fallen out of favor with a lot of popular like conservative Christians, and so I don't know if they really see any value in the transactional nature of their relationship anymore.
It's interesting because what you're seeing is all of the bad things he did. It's not that turned them away. It's that he's a loser. It's that he lost in 2020. It's that he lost. His Senate candidates flopped. It's that, Blake Masters and Carrie Lake and Dr. Oz and Doug Mastriano all flopped. That all these election deniers lost in all those Secretary of State or Chief Election Officer elections. The people he endorsed flopped. And so they don't think he can win. And again, because it's entirely transactional, that's what matters, is winning. And if they don't see him as the winner, then they're not going to back him. Frankly, he's got the stench of defeat around him right now. And, they see him weakened. They see him not necessarily, I mean, the polling between him and DeSantis from Florida, has them neck and neck. It has Trump up some, it has DeSantis up some, like depends on who you're looking at, where you're looking. But, I think they're probably shopping for a new horse right now. They're looking for a new person who can win, because again, that's all that matters, is winning so we can get judges on the courts, because they know that they can't win an election. So they have to use the anti-democratic, the counter-democratic branch of our government, the intentionally counter-democratic branch of our government, to protect their power, because they know they can't win an election, right? They know they can't win on out and out Christian nationalism, but if they can get, a magic wizard in a robe to say, oh, no, this this fancy document here that was written however long ago. Actually, the deep history and tradition of this secret document says that you can't regulate Christianity in any way. Like that's what they're doing. That's the regime that they're creating. And because they know that if you put it to a vote, they would lose. They would lose every single time. And I mean, they lost in Arkansas. The thing that I was talking about with the religious freedom amendment lost in Arkansas because it was too extreme. Imagine that a state where 2/3 of people voted for Sarah Huckabee Sanders and fewer than 50% voted for this amendment. 16% pulled the lever for Sarah Huckabee Sanders and then said, ooh, this religious thing, a little too extreme for me, right? Like that's what we're talking about here. And so you got to have a winner. It's all about, they need a winner, and they need to get somebody in office that will appoint judges to insulate them from any level of public and popular accountability. Because when you put it to a vote, their ideology is just catastrophically unpopular. It's dangerously out of step with the majority of Americans, even in deep red states like Arkansas, Alabama, Missouri, wherever. It doesn't matter. They're going to lose. And so they know that, so they need to capture the courts.
Yeah, well, what I find is that the same people that'll vote for like Sarah Huckabee Sanders and vote no on the religious extremism, it seems like they still vote for the people that want to force the same kind of religious extremism through the government. So it always perplexes me whenever they vote so unevenly like that.
Yeah, I mean, and part of this, by the way, is that people have there's a really interesting book. It's called Strong Partisanship, Weak Parties, or the other way around, weak parties, strong parties. It's something like that. But it's this really interesting analysis where Americans increasingly view partisan identity as a core identity, that people, just like religion, just like, regional location or national origin or whatever, they view their partisan identity as a really important, like, core component of who they are as a person. But along with that, party structures themselves have been weakened so much that you can have a sort of I almost said an insurrection candidate, but maybe not the best choice of words. But you can have a candidate who can sort of run this like guerrilla campaign within your party and like take it over from the inside, which is what Donald Trump did. Donald Trump, ditched a bunch of like really unpopular things that the Republican Party stood for on issues related to Social Security, on Medicare, Medicaid. He even you remember this. He said, we're going to get rid of Obamacare and replace it with something better, where you're going to pay even lower premiums, where it's going to cover even more, and then we're going to raise taxes on rich people like me to pay for it. Right. Like he said all those things while he was running, and then he didn't do any of them. But like he said all of those things and yet it was popular because fundamentally, people were like, oh yeah, cool. Free stuff. Great. Awesome. And so like, that was a way of like taking over the party. And then he just sort of did standard Republican things and also delivered a shitload of judges, right? That ultimately was what it was about. Judges, tax cut, we're going to pay some lip service to the religious side of things. But ultimately, we're going to strike down Roe. We're going to implement, we're going to get 6 of these ultra-conservative Christian nationalists on the bench. It'll be great. Like that was the transaction that was made. And so because of that, yeah, people vote on their partisan identity, even if they disagree. I mean, you can go back and look at DeSantis winning in 4 years ago. So in 2018, a bill implementing voting rights for convicted felons passed like huge, like I think it was more than 66%, because I think it needed a 2/3 majority or a 60% majority, and it easily passed the re-implementing voting rights for felons, and as well as like a minimum wage increase, where you'll see a minimum wage increase pass and a Medicare or a Medicaid expansion pass with like 65% of the vote. And then you'll see a Republican candidate who's against both of those things win with 55%. So, this isn't a new thing, though, the idea that people support these individual policies, but then will vote for people that don't want to do those things. It's not that uncommon. I mean, even in Michigan, where the Democrat won, Gretchen Whitmer won this year in Michigan, the amendment that codified a right to abortion won by more than she did. And so you had people voting for Tudor Dixon, who opposed it, who said that she would criminalize abortion if she wanted to, or if she could, would criminalize birth control, voted for her while also voting for this amendment. Like that's not uncommon. That's just like, that's like a thing. That's that's what happens in American politics, especially if you ask people about like one issue, and that's the downside, or the maybe I don't want to maybe assign a value to it, but like that's the side effect of having two parties is you're going to vote on salient issues, and even when you disagree on this issue and that issue and this other issue, there might be something that's prompting you more so to pull the lever. And it happens on both sides, right? Like if you're a person who is rich, who has like good private health care, and is not worrying about getting an abortion, and you go vote for a Democrat, like, yeah, that potentially is hurting your material self-interest, right? Why are you voting against your self-interest? Well, because you have other reasons. You had other policy agreements that you agreed with. The same is true on the other side. And so like I saw somebody say, oh, people are voting against their self-interest. True. But people do it all the time, and it's what you prioritize. And so, not a new thing. It's going to continue happening as long as we have parties. But it's interesting to see where people draw that distinction and where people draw the line, and what ultimately gets them to pull the lever for one candidate or another. I'm always fascinated by that.
Yeah, me too. Just letting everybody know in the side chat, I really want to say thank you to the Mythic Life and Johnny Rapine for donating to American Atheists. I was planning on matching donations up to $200, so we're about $60 away from that. I don't know if we can get up there, but I'll match. We're $30 away. Okay, we're $30 away.
It's happening. Now. It's happening.
Yeah. The GE here, like the actual GE channel, is going to match all donations up to $200. So
that's very generous. Thank you.
Yeah. No. Thank you for coming on and talking about this, because it's very important. But to get into our last couple of questions here. Now, I'm wondering, and maybe you've kind of already answered this, but I'm wondering, who do you think is more of a Christian nationalist threat? Would that be Marjorie Taylor Greene or somebody like Nick Fuentes?
I always come down on the side that people with actual like government power who support this ideology are the biggest threats. Nick Fuentes is ostracized by the overwhelming majority of people in political power. I mean, there are still, don't get me wrong, there are members of the House of Representatives that go hang around with this dude, who show up to his events, but he's really toxic. But like, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert and the Andy Biggs and the guy from Arizona whose entire family hates him. Like, all these people have power. These are people, members of Congress, who are going to be sitting in the majority of committees, whoever the new Speaker of the House is going to owe them a favor, because they're going to have to get that person's vote. And like, that's really dangerous. And so like, I always hear, people like freaking out about cancel culture, or, freaking out about, oh, this person is, was critical of me and I've been silenced, while at the same time sort of like ignoring what's happening, the same thing that's happening from when government officials do it, when it's somebody who just happens to like make vague mouth noises about how cancel culture is bad, and then they go and try to get, a public university professor fired for criticizing them, or try to muzzle an entire state's university system. Cough, Ron DeSantis. Like, this is, I'm much more concerned about people exercising government power in really terrifying ways than I am about somebody on social media being mean to you or being mean to me, right? And so, like, Nick Fuentes has a crappy YouTube show that, yes, gets a lot of views in really dark places of the internet, but he's fundamentally just some dude sitting in front of a green screen with a fake version of New York City, leaning too close to the camera and ranting about how white genocide is real. Marjorie Taylor Greene is going to be on congressional committees. She's going to have the ear of somebody who has the power to issue subpoenas, to drag people before Congress to testify. If Ron DeSantis were president, these people would have a direct line into the White House. and could use the power of federal agencies to, punish their enemies. I mean, and Ron DeSantis is already doing that in California, in Florida, where Disney. This is like such a stupid thing to say out loud, but rather like he found the Little Mermaid too woke or whatever, and so they threatened to take away the tax exemption, the special tax exemption that we can disagree about whether or not Disney should have it in Florida, but they do. And the reason he took it away was because Disney like modestly pushed back on his Don't Say Gay bill, right? Like he's using the power of the state to exact revenge on a political opponent. And that's something that you can only do if you have political power. And so Nick Fuentes is some guy. He's some guy with a big audience. And I don't think I don't think we can say, oh, he's a nobody and we should ignore him. I think we have to push back because he does have a big platform. He does have a big megaphone. But it's just like an entirely different sort of order of magnitude of power when somebody is in elected office, when they are, especially if they're an executive. Marjorie Taylor Greene is one person out of 435, but she's about to get the keys to like some subcommittee or have the ear of a chairman of some committee that can drag somebody before Congress. And so I'm always much more concerned about that. And by the way, Marjorie Taylor Greene is one person in the federal legislature. I guarantee you that if you look at if anybody watching this looks at your state legislature, no matter where you are, there's going to be somebody who is far worse than Marjorie Taylor Greene in your state legislature. Somebody who is just as unhinged, who says just as absurd things, who is nowhere near as sophisticated as Marjorie Taylor Greene, and is 5 times worse in terms of what they believe. And that's a person who has all those same powers in your state, right? And that's horrifying. And if you're in, and depending on what state you're in, this might be a person who's also in the majority, and it's like a super majority, and they might be like the majority leader of your state's House of Representatives or whatever, right? That's terrifying. And there's so much more I could talk about in terms of like what we can do about state legislatures and some of the threats to what's happening in all 50 states, and what we can do about it. But unless we want to be here for the next 4 hours, I'll sort of like say, this is like one of my pet issues is making sure that state government functions better, because it's a government that can be highly responsive, which can be good for us, but it can also be just like an absolute dumpster fire for us when Christian nationalists get power, because you have people with term limits who have no staff, who have no budget. So they're like in the pocket of religious special interests, and they're getting these bills that religious groups like Project Blitz are churning out. They're like, oh, this sounds good. Yeah. Make it, Christian week here in the state of Alabama or the state of Pennsylvania. And then we're going to ban, trans people from existing in public. And then we're going to, put the King James Bible, make that part of the curriculum in our public schools. And then like, they can just get a bill and they can file it and it might pass. People don't read things. They a lot of state legislatures, they have a part-time legislature. They got no staff. They got no. They get handed a bill and they go, "Oh, that sounds great," and then they put it in there. And this is how we end up with just absolutely bizarre pieces of legislation enacted into law in these states.
Yeah. See, I guess the reason why this question came to mind was because of the fact that like. I believe it was Marjorie Taylor Greene that actually went and spoke at a Nick Fuentes event or something like that. Like it seems like I guess I'm afraid that there's a connection between these, these influencers in conservative Christian nationalist sort of circles and the politicians, because and this is we've been seeing. I don't know if you keep up with these people at all.
A bit, but I try not to like. You'd hang yourself in, like you'd throw yourself off of a building if all you did. I don't know how the disinformation reporters or the people who monitor this stuff. I don't know how they get through the day, because I would have to close my laptop and just move into a cave somewhere with no Wi-Fi if I had to spend an entire day listening to these people. So good on them. I'm glad they're able to do it.
Yeah. But I mean, like Nick, most recently, what I'm thinking about is Nick Fuentes, and then this guy named Vincent James. They both have fairly large platforms for
Yep.
I guess conservative Christian influencers, but they're really pushing for like a dictatorship,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
they're either placing Trump as king of America, or some similar conservative Christian
Yep.
like placeholder. And I'm really worried about it trickling from their mouths
Yep.
to elected politicians.
Yeah.
And I'm just
I
wondering,
mean,
what are your thoughts on that?
yeah, I mean, they're dangerous. I mean, the fact though is these guys who are saying this stuff out loud are sort of like the id of this movement. And but often all they are rodeo clowns. They're people who have no idea how to actually do anything. They are horrendously unsophisticated. They have no clue how to organize anything. They just get up there and they know they have to fill 2 hours a day of saying things. And this is like the new version of like talk radio. I mean, I grew up around or sort of hearing or watching what was going on with, people like Rush Limbaugh, or Alex Jones, where like a lot of the reason that these guys are so conspiratorial and why they are so extreme is because they have to fill all this time and just say more and more outrageous, outlandish things to keep people engaged and coming back and pissed off, and keep them listening to their shows so they have something to offer them, right? So they have some sort of like thing that you're getting from listening. And it's like, I alone can give you the solution to this, right? Which is what the same thing that Nick Fuentes is selling, that these sort of influencer weirdos on the alt-right, that's what they're selling. It's the same shtick. It's just that it's even more extreme, and it's on the internet now instead of on the radio, because almost no radio station would air it. But if you put it out online, you're going to find an audience somewhere for this. And so, again, these are not beliefs that no one else holds. They're willing to say it out loud. And I think I'm genuinely concerned about a future direction of a major faction of American politics that genuinely believes that they're constantly under siege and that they have to resort to counter-democratic, anti-democratic means of preserving their way of life and preserving their power. And what we have to do is not stand for that, is push back on those counter-democratic impulses. I mean, it sounds flippant to say it, but like, vote like our rights depend on it, because they do. Like, everybody says that, but it's absolutely true that this sort of like creeping fascism of anti-democratic entrenchment of power is only possible if we allow it to happen. And that means pushing back every single time. It means, fighting back and not allowing our institutions to be captured in this way. And it means being on guard and vigilant for this sort of stuff. And, an acknowledgement that just because our political system has survived 250 years doesn't mean it's going to survive another 250 unless we're willing to push back and willing to stand up and willing to get engaged. That's a core part of it. Just because something has existed for a while, it's never safe. And we have to recognize that. And, these people are dangerous, and it means, and that means that we have to be ready to call it out every single time and point to their extremism, because again, the average American doesn't want this. And the overwhelming majority of Americans don't want this. And that means standing up for and protecting our democracy. That means taking steps to ensure that our democracy continues to be reflective of the will of the American people. It means taking steps to make that more responsive, so people feel that their government, when they vote a certain way, that the government actually reflects what they voted for. And so those sorts of reforms, like, I view those as atheist issues because atheists care about them, because we fundamentally believe that, this is our one life to live. We have to, use the tools in front of us to enact policy change. We have to, and the best way to do that is through our democracy, through voting, through being engaged in the public process. So we have to build a better system that works for us, that works for everybody. And sometimes we win and sometimes we lose, but ultimately, as long as we're playing by the rules, And as long as those rules preserve people's rights, then we're okay. And so, that's why I think it's so important, and why, I've sort of consciously positioned American Atheists within the broader civil rights space to talk about voting rights, to encourage our groups to get involved in voter protection, to encourage them to get out there and register people to vote, to advocate for, democracy protecting policies, and don't shy away from this stuff. We don't just sit around here and agree with each other about how God doesn't exist, or focus exclusively on, oh, there's a 10 Commandment monument on the lawn over there. There's a lot more going on within our community than that. And our community groups are really engaged in this fight for democracy that I think really is defining the current political era. So I encourage people to get involved with that. If that's something that, excites you, then you should absolutely get involved locally.
Yeah, which I guess leads pretty well into my last question, and that's, kind of what can the normal average person like me, or members of my audience, what can we do to combat Christian nationalism? I know you had talked about participating locally and stuff, but is there anything else that we can do, of course, other than donating some money to American Atheists? That could also help.
Yeah. No, I mean, listen, the sort of obnoxious soundbite thing here is that democracy is not a participation sport. It's full contact, right? And I hate that, because it like gamifies it. It treats it like sport. It's not. It's serious business. These are serious things. But the sentiment is there that this is something we all have to be engaged in, that we all know that this is something that we have to take part in actively. And so, number one is, yes, get involved locally. That can take different forms for different people. That can mean joining a local group if there's one near you. It can mean starting one if there's not. But it can also mean just like it doesn't have to be an atheist group. It just has to be a group that shares your values on one issue, whatever that may be. And there will probably be some like-minded people there that you can find common ground with on other issues as well. That's sort of step number one, is find a place to get plugged in and get involved. If it's an atheist group, great. If it's not, that's fine too. Number two is to get out there and be heard. So that means find the lowest level of government, or the most accessible level of government, let's say. Go to their meetings, make yourself known, speak up about an issue, like every single meeting that you go to. If it's your city council, if it's your county board of commissioners, if it's your school board, go there and talk about an issue that you care about. It doesn't have to be something about church-state separation. It doesn't have to be something like, whatever. It can be anything. But be heard, and it builds up your credibility for the next time, for the next time that some other issue that you're really excited about comes up. That level of engagement, that side of relationship building, isn't the sort of thing that you can do overnight when something springs up kind of out of nowhere. You have to lay the groundwork, and it's what the other side has been doing for decades. So we need to do that as well. And then the third thing is get out there and run for office. Again, people are like, oh my gosh, I can't possibly do that. Marjorie Taylor Greene is a member of Congress, right? Lauren Boebert is a member of Congress. Jason Rapert was a member of the Arkansas State Senate, excuse me. Homeboy ran for lieutenant governor. Sarah Huckabee Sanders is going to be the governor of Arkansas, right? Like, if they can do it, you can do it. And so, those are sort of the three things. And by the way, I don't just mean, get up there and deliver a 1-minute speech. People do things differently. You can work behind the scenes. You can introduce yourself in private. If it's, doing a letter writing campaign, if it's something like organizing coffee after the meeting, or organizing coffee for the group that's meeting after you're done at the Board of Commissioners meeting, whatever it is. There's all sorts of different roles that people need to play in this, do social media, organize a social media campaign, whatever. There are ways that you can, and that's why it's so important to find a group, whether it's virtual or in person, because you'll find people that have different skill sets and different levels of comfort with different things. But I'm here to tell you, it's not rocket science. It's not, it's not impossible. Even if you're a person that's like, oh my God, I'm so introverted, I don't think I could possibly speak at this meeting. That's all that is imposter syndrome flaring up here. We all have expertise. We all have things that we're passionate about. We all have things we know a lot about that the people on that board, the people on that commission, the people on that council don't know about and aren't experts on, and they're relying on whoever comes to them with expertise. And if it's not us, it's going to be the other side. And so if you care about public education, you've got a story to tell. You can tell that story. You don't have to have the facts and figures, and like they don't even care about all that. A lot of times what they care about is a personal story. And that's, that can be really impactful for people. So, get plugged in with somebody, anybody, any group, and, tell them you want to prioritize getting involved locally. That's the single best starting point that anybody can start with, because it tamps down the power that these Christian nationalist groups have to take over our local governments, which is what they've spent a lot of time and money and resources doing. And we've got to push back against it. So.
Awesome. And I think that those are great pieces of advice for anybody looking to help. And it seems like, we've actually raised the $200 for GE to match the donation. So I'm going to do that right now. While I'm doing that, Nick, do you want to sort of remind everybody where they can find you, where they can find American Atheists and everything like that?
Yeah, I usually give my Twitter. So I'll give that now. But if anyone's watching this in like 3 months, 6 months, I don't know what the time horizon is going to be. But yes, my Twitter is Nicholas R. Fish. The American Atheist Twitter is @AmericanAtheist. No S on the end of that, just @AmericanAtheist. But if you want to go to our website, find out what we're doing, sign up for action alerts, sign up for our emails, it's just atheists.org. Or go ahead and just Google American Atheists and you'll find us, or top result. We really value having folks in the fight on our email list and helping out. There's always a lot of work to be done in every single state. Like I said, we don't just deal with what's going on with in Arkansas or Alabama or Mississippi. We're working in Virginia and New York and Colorado and California, as well as all the other states I mentioned previously. So there's a lot going on no matter where you are. And then the last thing I'll mention is that our national convention will be in April of 2023 in Phoenix. Check that out. Tickets will be on sale shortly. We always have a really great time. It's one of the most fun things you can do. Really community focused. We don't just have speakers come and talk at you for 2.5 days. We do a lot of community events, including service projects and food bank, and it's a really great time. So check it out. It's going to be in Phoenix this upcoming year. We hope to see you there. And we'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions, just shoot us an email.
Yeah, definitely. And if you're if you want to email Nick and tell him how he's ruining America, I'm sure that he'd appreciate that as well.
It gives me good hashtag content. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I do want to appreciate everybody watching tonight. I know that Casey and I are gonna try to make it out there to the next American Atheist conference, and I know that. I think here in maybe December, there's supposed to be some more information getting released.
Yep. Coming up, like in about a week, there will be all that. Like right after Thanksgiving is when we have everything up. So keep an eye out on our website. That'll be just convention.atheist.org, or it'll be on the front page of atheist.org.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'm gonna compile all the links, get them down there in the description. So if y'all want to help out, or if y'all want to, just refer people to this video for the Christian nationalism and what it is and why it's important that we fight back against it, that would be very much appreciated. And Nick, thank you for joining us tonight. And I guess I will let you get on with your night. Heathens out there, we're not going to be having a live stream this week, but we will see you guys next week with a normal week, including live streams and all that kind of stuff. So thank you guys so much for donating, and I guess we will see you heathens later. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, everybody.
Bye.